All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Mark McNear. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Guy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So Mark is a licensed clinical social worker who maintains a private practice in New Jersey. With over 30 years of experience in clinical practice, Dr. McNear now focuses on helping those who've had trauma, abuse, and addictions in their lives, sharing the hope of healing that he has realized in his own life. He graduated from Northeastern Bible College, New York University, and Oxford Graduate School. In addition to his private practice, Dr. McNear has been a speaker to general audiences nationwide. He's also been a frequent guest on nationally syndicated radio broadcasts and podcasts. He's written for magazines and co-hosted panelists and videos dealing with Christianity and mental health. His new book, Finding My Words, A Ruthless Commitment to Healing Gently After Trauma, is available on Amazon. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Guy.
So before we get going, Mark, please share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I'm from New Jersey. New Jersey. Yeah, I haven't moved.
Awesome. I'm from the East Coast originally myself. So
hey.
Great to speak with you. All right, let's dive in. What happened?
That's a good question. That's a really great question.
How is it that here we are right now talking about this?
All right. So March 2015, I called my psychiatrist and I asked her for refills, and it became evident to her that I was abusing the medication, that I was addicted. So she says to me, I want you to go to rehab. Not something that I wanted to hear at all, but that's what she said. So I can remember waiting for my wife to get home, Debbie, and she came home. She's a school teacher. She came home from school, and I said to her, I just had a conversation with a psychiatrist, and she thinks that I need to go to rehab. And Debbie said, I think that's wonderful. I think it's a really good idea for you to go, because she saw that my life was going downhill for quite a while. I had stopped working, and, I was pretty much sleeping half the day. And the rest of the day, I was watching TV, just zoning out. So that began a tremendous healing journey for me. It was pretty humiliating. I had to call colleagues and ask them, what rehabs would you recommend? And they said, for who? And I said, for me. And they said, oh, wonderful. So I found a rehab that was a few hours away. My wife took me there, and I can remember the ride there was just really difficult. I felt like my life was over. I had gotten really severely addicted to prescription medications and would augment with counter medications.
Well, okay, so you started at the rehab here, but what led to that?
Okay, so let me kind of go backwards a little bit. I went to rehab. Okay. And one of the most painful things that I experienced going to rehab is when the medication came out of my system, Guy, the memories of my childhood came back. Shortly after being at rehab, I was diagnosed with complex PTSD or complex trauma. Memories like when I was 4 years old, my dad force-fed me carrots, and I ended up vomiting. And then he picked me up from the dinner table and threw me across the room into the garbage and said, stay there, you're a piece of garbage, that's where you belong.
Oh my God.
So, like I said, there were just so many memories that I had compartmentalized and put away and used medication to cope with. When I was 5 years old, my dad had burned down a garage across the street from our house. He wanted to collect the insurance money. And so the fire got out of control, and it went toward the gas pumps, the underground gas pumps. And I can remember him running into the house screaming, get under the beds, it's going to blow. It didn't blow up, but that was not good for my nervous system at 5 years old. Another thing that I talk about in the book is that from the age of 4 to about 7, I was sexually abused by my dad. And I talk about it in more detail in the book, the aggressiveness and just strange things that had happened. Ironically, at 7 years of age, it stopped. And that's because we had armed robbery in our home, where 4 men came in with guns. 2 of them took my parents and my aunt and uncle to the cellar in the basement. And that's where there was a vault with coins and money and things like that. Upstairs, my siblings, my brother, my sister, and I were there. And there were 2 guys watching over us. We didn't wake up, we were asleep, but they were there for about an hour. So after that, the house really fell apart. My mom became an alcoholic, and my dad became very, very paranoid. And I tell this strange story in the book. I told it to counselors, and a lot of the counselors that I've had, therapists that I've had, recommended, or encouraged me to write the book. These strange stories.
Jeez.
So my dad became paranoid, and he actually gave my sister and I forks and knives and spoons and had us dig out a room in the basement where he could hide. Yeah, where he could hide coins and money and things like that.
Mark,
I know.
I mean, yeah, I'm just thinking the first thing that how do you survive? How do you get through this?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
I sat in rehab. It was so strange because one of the things in rehab that they have you do is tell your story. And Guy, I couldn't tell my story. I wasn't emotionally ready to tell my story. I wasn't emotionally centered enough. I was too emotionally dysregulated. And not only that, I didn't have the words. I didn't have the words to be able to talk about these things.
So how did you actually manage that as a young kid?
I think that I used a lot of dissociation and compartmentalization, to be able to cope.
Yeah.
I had a lot of symptoms of anxiety and depression as a kid. I also had a lot of symptoms that would be synonymous with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
I did very poorly in school. Fantasized a lot. I learned to fantasize.
And was that the kind of entryway to your use of substances?
I started school. I went to Bible college and decided that I wanted to be a therapist. I had started going to a therapist while I was at Bible college, and was really, really helpful. And so I decided that I wanted to go into that field. And so I went to New York University and started my master's degree in social work. And during that time, I had such anxiety that a colleague had recommended, going to see somebody in the city. And they gave me medication. Mm-hmm. I was diagnosed with ADHD. I was diagnosed with anxiety and panic disorder. And I was diagnosed with major depression.
And during any of this time, was there any mention of possible trauma?
No.
Nothing.
You remember, it wasn't something we talked about.
Of course.
You were diagnosed with, things like I got diagnosed with ADHD or anxiety or depression. I don't think I would have been open to talk about a lot of the things that happened in my home. I had gotten the messages that you don't talk about those things.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of them weren't even accessible because, I had so compartmentalized them and denied them. And other parts of it, I wasn't willing to talk about. And then the book is chapters 4, 5, and 6 are filled with, I gave you just highlights, but they're filled with things that happen.
At what point did you realize what had gone on? You mentioned in rehab.
Yeah, I was 55 when I went to rehab. And so I'm sitting there and as the medications are going out of my system, and as, I'm experiencing these things in my body and flashbacks are coming. I remember I had a really astute psychologist who said to me, I'm not so sure some of these diagnoses are accurate, I think he might have been traumatized, from the little things that I had shared with him.
And was that the beginning, in a sense of, yeah,
a long road of healing?
Oh my God.
My dad was very strange. He grew up in the Depression era and had his own mental health issues, obviously. One of the things he used to do, guys, he used to fill the kitchen sink up with water and detergent and then pour into it $100 bills and then iron them after he washed them and stapled them in packs of 1,000. And would put them in a metal suitcase.
Mm.
Just strange behaviors.
Bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah. So was it at 55 years of age when you began healing?
I talked to him. He had been in therapy off and on, but there was just so much brokenness that I had and so much, shame. Talking about these things that, I'd begin to tell somebody something and I'd see their face and I would be like, okay, no more of that. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. I got the message of how strange it was.
Yeah.
So I started working a little bit in rehab in my mind, just thinking about things in my mind. But like I said, I didn't have the words for it. And then when I got out, I started seeing a therapist individually. And then I went into traditional 12-step work, which was phenomenal for me.
Mm.
I went into IOP and stayed there for about a year, just wanting to work on myself as much as I could. I took 2 years off.
Now, before and during this time, were you a therapist, social worker?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So, Mark, how do things unfold such that you say, okay, you know what? This is what's gone on. I need to work on this. How did you, quote unquote, work on processing all of that?
Okay, well, it was step by step,
Sure.
Like a little bit in IOP, a little bit in individual. Then I had stopped with one individual therapist and worked with a therapist, Harry Flanagan, his name is, and he was trauma informed. And I remember him asking me to type up on a Word document, traumas that I had experienced, and I did that. And, as I did that, even more traumas came back and more memories came back. And so we sat and we went through those. I did a lot of brain spotting.
Mm-hmm.
Intermittent brain spotting between those sessions because of flashbacks and because of the difficulties that, arose in my body. I did a lot of story work, a lot of narrative work, a lot of therapy that way. I did a lot of body work or somatic work.
So you tried pretty much everything.
Well, yeah, I read The Body Keeps a Score, and I read Gabor Mate's books and, just a lot of people that you've had on. And just kind of grabbed as much of that as I could and said, okay, I just started internal family systems work, and it's been really, really helpful for me. My wife points out that it's had to be step by step by step, because stuff I'm doing now, I don't think I would have been ready to do.
Yeah.
Like 3 years ago, I couldn't have tolerated it in my body.
Well, I commend you for doing that. I mean, what courage it takes to go through that journey. And I just want to say, coming on here and sharing this, I really appreciate it. It's not easy. I certainly realize that. You mentioned IFS really helping you. What else really helped you?
The brain spotting really was helpful for me to be able to tolerate the feelings in my body and not feel like I needed to run away from them or have so much anxiety that I couldn't think about them.
Now, brain spotting is similar to EMDR, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would, do the protocols of pulling up certain thoughts, with the sexual abuse, and then I would stay focused with them and relax my body through brain spotting.
And what of the different therapists you've had, what stands out for you that someone or perhaps multiple people did that really did help you?
I think that one of the things that really stands out, I mentioned Harry Flanagan. He was tremendous because he just held my story well and stayed with me and held it with value. Another, I had done some intensives with a counselor by the name of Jay Stringer, and he also did tremendous story work with me, or narrative therapy with me, to help me to understand my story better. So I think it's not even the techniques are important, but I think it has been the connection with the therapists that have held the story well and given me such value.
Now, when you say held the story well, what do you mean specifically?
Well, this is a hard story. And so I had people that were able to stay focused with me and not pull back and not leave the room, so to speak, emotionally, that they were able to stay there with me emotionally. And so that was really important to me.
And during this time, you mentioned marriage. Were you married? Did you have kids? Did you have a family?
Yeah. I have my wife Debbie. We have a great marriage now. No, we didn't, but we do. No, my daughter Emily. I am so close to her. We have worked on our relationship. She got married. Husband Brandon, I love him so much. They're in Wyoming right now. That's a whole nother story for another podcast. But but just to be able to come alive and to be able to enjoy your family is just phenomenal.
Oh man, I'm curious about how your experience here, your journey of healing, has impacted your work.
Yeah, well, when I trained at NYU, there was a lot of emphasis on cognitive, work, and nothing was talked about with the body at that time. So just learning to stay with people, stay with their story, stay focused on my body, but also be aware of what their body is doing and help them to maneuver through that has been really, really helpful, I think, clinically. For me to, in IFS, terms, to realize what my parts are doing when I'm in session with somebody, and realizing, how they might be reacting, and to be able to explore that, but to be grounded in myself has been really, really helpful.
What's been, as you're talking, and as you've shared, there's obviously a lot here. And let me just remind everyone I'm speaking with, Dr. Mark McNear. The book is called Finding My Words, A Ruthless Commitment to Healing Gently After Trauma. Mark, what's been, would you say, challenging to you in this journey? Was it looking at your story? Was it trying to shift your story? Was it finding purpose? What would you say?
I think there's been there's a combination of all of those. I think that's a great question. I think in the beginning, I was so caught up. I took 2 years off from work, and I was so caught up in just like trying to stay in my body, to stay clean, to stay sober, which I was able to do, to be able to work through my marriage first. I wasn't sure that I was going to go back into clinical work. If I was feeling the way I did when I first got out of rehab, I knew that I couldn't do it. And so the goal was to see if I could heal and return to it. And I was able to, and find purpose in that, which was really important to me. I love what I do now. I'm seeing people clinically, working with the book, working with articles, doing podcasts and speaking and doing things like that. So, the diversification has been really, really exciting for me.
When you've talked about your story, what do you see as your story right now?
I think that I see somebody who was severely traumatized, who had a lot of maladaptive behaviors and a lot of issues with mental health, that has realized a good deal of healing and is looking forward to more healing.
And that's
just realizing that healing is possible.
Yeah. I mean, that is huge. And I think it's so important for a lot of people to hear that, especially after hearing, the as you called it, the highlights of what you shared. You almost couldn't blame anyone for thinking, how do you get through that? How does one move through that?
I think that my spiritual life, going through the 12 steps and having a higher power God of my understanding has been, really crucial for me. Realizing that I can bring kindness to myself, even though I didn't experience that.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of, that trauma brings about addictions, to be able to cope, and so finding ways to be able to cope, that are adaptive.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, self-care, like really learning what good self-care looks like for me.
You mentioned IFS and you said that was really helpful. What about that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's a great question, Guy. I've just started doing it for about the last 6 months. And the thing that has been really helpful, one thing, it's been very emotional and very eye-opening for me to see, kind of like the fragmented parts or the parts that the exiles that have hidden, or have been pushed down. One of the things for me, and I don't know if this is the case for others, but I can speak for myself, I have suffered from quite a few flashbacks that have been really painful, especially things with the sexual abuse, pertaining to that. And they have actually begun to dissipate in my work. Now, I don't know if it's cumulative from all of the other work that I've done and now with IFS, or if it's IFS, or, it's hard to measure. But I think that it has helped my body to come down even more.
Mm-hmm. Talk about the genesis of the book. How did you get to a point where you're like, okay, I got to write this down. I want to write this down.
Well, what was the idea that I was in rehab and I just didn't have the words. And so, as I worked with different counselors, they had challenged me to, and I was like, no way, I'm not gonna put this down.
They challenged you to write a book?
Yeah. Yeah, because the story is a unique story, and so the first part of the book is finding my words, and the second part of the book is speaking my words, and then the third part of the book is embracing my words. And so I was at dinner with a couple friends of ours that she had said, well, the couple actually said to me, like, why don't you write a book? And it was the first time after other people had said it that I was like, maybe I will. And so that's where it came from. And, and in rehab, I was like, I'll never tell this story to anybody. There's no way I'm going to my grave. I'm not talking about this.
And what did you want to do through the book? What was your purpose in writing the book?
I wanted to be vulnerable. I wanted to be authentic. I wanted to say to people, you know what? We all have difficulties. We're all broken in different ways. And to say, like, you know what? There's rationale for the addiction. It makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That behaviors just don't come out of the blue.
Right.
And that the message was for people who've had addiction or had issues with trauma, that if I could do it, they could do it. And families that are watching people that are addicted and just like, what is going on? Hopefully they can read the book and say, yeah, there's rhyme or reason to this behavior that doesn't make sense.
How has your sense of self shifted? You talked about shame. How has that modulated? How has your sense of purpose? What's that arc been like for you?
Well, I think that one of the most significant things for me has been to become a safe husband and a safe father, and to have real connection with my wife Debbie and my daughter and son-in-law. From there, I think that just having purpose of being able to say, I've gone through some of these things, and I know what it's like, I know how hard it is. To other people, I think that there's healing even in that.
I would certainly agree. And I would think that, I mean, just from speaking with you in this context, that you have so much to share as a therapist, as an author. Your journey, I mean, to talk to you and just to hear what you're saying, and from what you've gone through to where you are now, how you've embodied and embraced these different modalities, healing modalities, is not only incredible, it's inspiring.
Thank you.
What do you say to people who are listening, who you come in contact with, who have maybe gone through something? What is your suggestion to them, or advice to them? Maybe they're not in the healing stage. Maybe they're still addicted.
Okay, that's a great question. I think to realize that we're all human, that we all have issues, to be able to even find one person to talk to that's safe is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't want to talk at meetings, that's fine. Just go. Just listen. That's what I did. I didn't talk. I just listened. Just start somewhere. The journey's tough. Takes a long time, but it's definitely worth it.
I know we're kind of getting down here towards the end of the time here, but you mentioned your daughter and your relationship with her. What was that like? You said you had to kind of work through it and repair it. What was it like prior to that?
I think that that's a hard question, but I'm going to answer it. I think when she was younger, it was really good. I think that we had some real good bonding, which I think is really important for our relationship now. It went off the rails because my behavior was off.
Mm-hmm.
So it really deteriorated. And by the time I went to rehab, she had moved to Florida, and she gave reasons for it, but they weren't the reasons. It's because of how my behavior was,
mm-hmm.
And so it was hard. She flew up from Florida and spent a day or two at rehab. And that was like wonderful and embarrassing, both, but I knew she cared. And she has been, number one person rooting me to go forward at this point. We have been able to, during the pandemic, she came to live with us, and so did Brandon. And so it was just a great time for them to see the progress that I had made,
mm-hmm.
and just for us to connect and do things together.
Wow.
So it was not good, and now it's great. But I've worked hard on it.
Again, Mark, the book is called Finding My Words, Ruthless Commitment to Healing Gently After Trauma. This is available where? Amazon and everywhere?
Yeah.
Okay. Mark, incredible. I mean, you are so inspiring. My God. I mean, this is why I do this podcast. Seriously, talk to people like you. And yeah, I mean, I really want to thank you for coming on here. And I'd love to have you back at a later time too.
It's been a privilege.
Yeah. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
People can go on the web at www.markmcnear.com. That's my website.
Okay. And we'll have that
there that they can reach out to me. I have an email.
Okay. We'll have that linked up here at the show notes page at thetraumatherapistpodcast.com. Mark, an honor speaking with you. And
been great, Guy.
Appreciate that. And like I said, love to have you back at a later date. All right. Take care.
Okay.